Wolf Pack, what is going on? It's your boy, the Wolf, Roto Street, rotostreetjournal.com. We breed and feed you fantasy wolves here with yet another Best Ball Monday draft. As always, we're going to dive into a topic, and what better to dive into before we draft than the 2024 NFL schedule just coming out, and anybody that's played best ball for a long time, and of course, even just fantasy football with those playoff weeks, knows that it becomes a separate season in those last weeks 15, 16, and 17, especially in best ball when that is where all the huge money is. And we're going to talk about why week 17 is almost all that matters. It's something that Pete Overzet coined in a great video 2 years ago. He's gone on to update it in the years since, and there's just some great minds doing some great research on the expected value of tickets and all the stuff that my brain personally can't necessarily comprehend without the assists of these guys. So we're going to cite a ton of the excellent research being done at RotoViz, being done by Overzet about week 17, talking about how you maximize that week 17 for the most possible profit. And then, of course, we'll dive into a draft, put our talk into practice, and show you what it's done. So this is the best way, Wolfpack, to win that $1.5 million. You need to be ready for week 17. That's when all the big prize money is going. My man, Mo, let's dive in, shall we?
Yeah. Let's get into it. Like you said, there's a lot of complex math and concepts, but we're gonna try and break it down as easily as possible and as simply as possible, and give you some other resources, some other people who have broke it down pretty clearly to emphasize the importance of week 16, and then talk about how we can construct our rosters to succeed in the fantasy playoffs, and more specifically in week 16. So, just jumping right into things. If you've played best ball, you've probably heard that phrase at some point in time. Week 17 is all that matters, and that's true for the most part. Actually, for the most simply, the easiest way to put it is this season, BBM 5, 66% of the prize pool is reserved for week 17. So if your team isn't playing in the final of BBM, you're only able to reach 33% of the total money that's available. So with no regular season payouts, we're playing to win the whole thing. We're not playing to min cash in these earlier playoff weeks, and there's no regular season prizes anymore. So it's obviously all coming down to week 17. So we really need to advance to that point, which kind of brings into the fact that week 16 matters to a degree, which we'll get into. But at the end of the day, we're all playing for first. We want to win the top prize. So why not try to optimize your lineup for week 17? Are you kind of on the same page there?
110%. Yeah. Again, 66% of the money that's up for grabs is in that last week. So, of course, you have to get there, but optimizing for what can my lineup look like in week 17 to get the best shot at that top prize, at cashing out. And that's what we're going to show you now, is how the prize structure is layered out this year. If you're watching this video, you're into best ball this early, you may have already seen this. You probably already understand this, but it does change the philosophy from week 17 is the only thing that matters to, actually the expected value of week 16 is pretty damn good too, because it is a much flatter payout structure. Instead of 3 million, over 30% of the top prizes at the just only one person getting them, it's now 10%, 1.5 million. So a little less quote unquote sexy in terms of the grand prize. But then you also look at the fact that 20 people are now making six figures in this tournament. That is a significant amount. I was listening to a great podcast with Pat Carrain and Eric over from Spike Week, and he talked about how he had a 12th place. Eric finished last year, got $1,500. This year, he would have gotten $125,000 for that 12th place privilege. So yes, I get that the top not being quite as 3 million, it's still $1,500,000. That is $500K. That is a ton of money. And then you have just another shot at that quote unquote, in my opinion, life-changing money to get six figures on the spot like that. So yes, of course you want to win that money. So week 17, again, to get to that big money is the goal, but just getting into the tournament. And the other fact too is, at the bottom, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mo, but I believe just making to the finals, which I shouldn't say just making, it's an impossible task. RotoViz had a great article saying like in 8.5 years is the expected chance of, if you max entered every year for 8.5 years, that would be the quote unquote expected rate that you get in once. So it's not even that easy to get into the finals, but should you make it, you get a $3,750 back, which is essentially the cost of max entering. So it becomes this like amazing, awesome free roll to just get in. Whereas in the past, just making the finals, again, those ridiculous long odds to even make it, you'd only get $1,000. Only 1,000. Again, I get is great, but to know that you're already free rolling should you make the finals is such a nice boost to this payout structure as well. So that does boost the expected value of week 16 quite a bit. We had another graphic here where it talks about from that RotoViz article I'm citing. And if you want the more in-depth math, go check out this article, Dubner_Michael on Twitter. Great piece here breaking down the expected values of certain weeks. I know you've written about this a bit, Mo. So do you want to kind of walk us through what some of these numbers mean?
Yeah, so I've got an article that should be hitting our site in the next day or so. But yeah, this is kind of just breaking down the value of a team in each round of the tournament. So we look here in round 1, weeks 1 to 14, and here this is a comparison of BBM 5 versus BBM 4. And I'm going to start by taking a look at BBM 5. So right after you draft a team, your team is worth an average of $22.30. And you might be wondering, well, I spent $25 to draft my team. Where's the rest of that money going? Well, that's the rake. That's the cut that Underdog's taking. But so your team takes a hit immediately. So that kind of works into the math of how you need to improve your advance rate to end up being profitable in this tournament. But in round 1, the average team is worth $22.30. But then we look to week 17, the average team is worth almost $18,500. So, I mean, it's just quite a whopping difference. I mean, that alone should paint the picture of why you want to set up your team to not only reach week 17, but then win or succeed in week 17. And something that we've been talking about here a little bit is the difference in payment structure between BBM 4 and BBM 5. Without the regular season prizes, as well as a flatter payout structure throughout the tournament as a whole, we see that the value of a team in week 17 is much more valuable this season than it was last season. It's the average value of a team is over $4,000 higher. And you can see in the graphic there that a team in week 17 this year is worth over nearly 740 buy-ins, when last season it was just worth 579 buy-ins. So this season, optimizing for week 17 is as important as ever. So, I mean, I just generally, I'm a fan of this payout structure. I like the fact that week 17 seems to be more important than ever. And I like the fact that more players are going to have chances to earn life-changing money. Are you a fan of just like how they've decided to adjust this payout structure? Because I know a lot of people last year were not fans of a massive portion of the prize pool heading just to first place. And like you said, Eric from over at Spike Week only getting $1,500 for a 12th place finish, which would now pay 6 figures.
Yeah, I think that when I listened to that podcast, because at first I was like, oh man, not that huge top prize. I won obviously $1,500,000. Like, that is a great prize, don't get me wrong, but that $3 million, so sexy. And I actually really did well with the regular season payouts. I had a few teams in that top 10,000 that end up getting paid out. So I personally liked having that regular season buffer there. And yet just to have those better shots at life-changing money, even if I don't hit the exact nuts like a lot of you really need to have to get to that life-changing money, I think I ultimately at the first glance, like, man, I don't love this, especially again, taking away the regular season payouts, but it makes sense. I love the fact again, that if you make the big dance, you're at least min cashing all 150 entries that you could have put in. So I love that idea. I am ultimately a big fan of it, but it does change again that philosophy that yes, optimizing for the regular season. They had a great, and we'll keep referencing some of these resources, but I would highly recommend listening to the legendary Upside podcast. I love the metaphor they were using where they talked about how this is more like a triathlon where you have your marathon at the front, the regular season. That's only 25% of this race, especially now with the regular season not accounting for payouts at this point. So if you burn everything to try to just get into the dance, well, then the cycling comes up and yeah, it's only 1 week, but if you have nothing left, then you ultimately are setting yourself up to fail and not get to those. Now the swimming sport is here. The week 17, it really is 4 separate tournaments baked into one, even though one of the tournaments is so much longer. So I love the metaphors they use. It's such a more in-depth talk. They go for 2.5 hours. So we're only just kind of brushing the surface here with an overview. We do want to get to drafting and we want to keep it a little simpler. You want the more in-depth, just listening to so much game theory from 2 guys that have consistently made the finals. Definitely make sure you go check those guys out. Because again, we're That's what I think that the unique angle we can come from is we're trying to learn as much as anybody at this point. So we'll do a ton of research. We'll do that, but we haven't necessarily cracked the finals yet. So when you're asking, who else should I be learning from? Certainly check out the Spike Week guys. Check out Legendary Upside, Pat Carrain. Check out RotoViz. They have such great math on everything here, but it does make it significantly stronger. Now, we're going to talk about, we talk about how important it is to get into week 17, really week 16. You got to obviously get there to make the dance, but it should be clear that you want to get there. That's why we're playing it, not to just move our team along, min cash. You want to get all the way you possibly can. But once you're there, this is really the meat is what do I do? How do I optimize my roster to give myself the best shot at winning? So I'll jump in real quick and then obviously fill in any blanks I miss here, Mo. You kind of want to treat this, anybody that's played DFS in terms of those 1 week massive payouts, you almost want to look at it in that sense of how do I maximize how easy it could be to hit as many outs as possible. So if your lineup is correlated, and that means it's stacked in terms of, let's call it a Cowboy stack. You have Dak Prescott and then some of his weapons. A single stack would be Dak and CeeDee Lamb. Double stack, Dak, CeeDee Lamb, and Jake Ferguson. Maybe a triple stack and you have Brandon Cooks there. He maybe even load up and have Zeke and you have just a bunch of offensive pieces. That's stacking an offense. And why would we do that? Well, think about building an 18-leg parlay. You have so many random hits. You have 18 spots on your roster, and if none of them are correlated, if they're all coming from 18 different teams, you need every single little one of those things to bend right. Whereas if I load up on just an offense, then ultimately I don't have to get as much right. I just need that offense to go off. And if I have those pieces, there's a good chance that they're going off alongside the quarterback, especially the quarterback and his weapons. But the overall offensive environment as a whole is important too. Not just that, though. What's also become big in terms of the research here is the bring back, which is the other side of things. You want a game environment that's going to be conducive to that offense blowing up. So you want on the other side a team that's going to be scoring points alongside them. Yes, it does sometimes work out that you just have a punching bag opponent and your team puts up 35 and buries them. The Bills are infamous for doing that to weaker opponents. But ultimately, the more often case is you have two teams going back and forth, and it's just an eruption of a 55 to 70 point total, and you have pieces from both of them. Now, you don't have to go crazy, and your whole lineup is just one team and their week 17 opponent. In fact, you shouldn't do that. You should be sprinkling in multiple little stacks here. But much as you can, you do want it to be correlated. And we'll talk about in a second when to do that correlation. Do you have to force it in the early rounds? How to make sure you get it late? Different strategies of that throughout the stages of the draft. But just in terms of what we mean by correlation, again, stacking those offenses that you think are going to go nuts. Great practice just for the entire regular season and those 4 set tournaments. But then, of course, in that week 17 mind frame, okay, what teams do we see that could push each other and ultimately have a great game environment that's conducive to fantasy success? Is there anything I'm kind of missing there in terms of stacking, running back, that DFS mindset, Mo, or is that kind of capture it?
No, I think you're kind of all there. So yeah, the primary strategy that people who are drafting a lot of best ball teams employ is just using these team stacks, using these bringbacks or game stacks. And it might sound confusing to people who don't really play DFS or are new to best ball, but I mean, at the end of the day, the math checks out on this. You can go look at the guys over at ETR who went through the data, not last season in BBM4, but they looked at all the advance rate data. So like when I say advance rate, in the first round of tournaments, in the first round of the BBM tournament, you're in a pod of 12 teams. So if you advance out of that pod of 12, I mean, that's a team that advances. So the advance rate of teams with stacked quarterbacks is much higher than the neutral advance rate. So neutral advance rate would be advancing 2 out of every 12 teams. But if you're able to, not if you're able, but if you build your teams with multiple stacks involved, your expected advance rate is higher than the neutral advance rate. And then that is also true of bringbacks. And that's kind of what we're showing in this figure right here. So you explain the general logic. If you're betting on a team with a game stack, you're betting that their offense is going to go off. You're betting that in week 17, the Dallas Cowboys offense is going to be firing on all cylinders. Dak's going to put up a bunch of fantasy points, and so are his receivers. And logically, just thinking about how NFL games work, if the Dallas Cowboys offense is going off, their opponent, who this year is the Philadelphia Eagles, their opponent is going to have to play at a high pace and probably throw a lot and try to put themselves in as many scoring positions to score as possible and provide themselves with scoring opportunities. So just like logically thinking about how an NFL game works, that makes sense. And then here we are, we have the data that once again backs that up. So how often does a player outscore their projection by 10 or more points? That is the second to last line you see on this figure with the 12.8% highlighted. So in any given random game, flex player, so a running back, wide receiver, or tight end, in any given game, they'll outscore their projection by 10 or more points in 12.8% of games. However, when they're the opponent of a quarterback that scores 30 or more fantasy points, so the opponent of a quarterback or an offense that's just completely going nuclear in a game, they outscore their projection by 10 or more points at a 20.8% clip. So that might not seem like a massive difference, but at the end of the day, when we're trying to find whatever edge possible to get on the field in these tournaments, I mean, you really have to take advantage of that. So the math backs up utilizing bringbacks and game stacks. So it's a strategy that is not only adopted by the smart drafters, but I mean, it's completely backed up by the research from past tournaments.
Yeah, and the only other note I'd add to that, as a phenomenal summary with some great numbers added as well. A point that I heard today that I hadn't really necessarily considered was they talked a lot, and that again, that podcast from Pat Carane and Eric from Spike Week, they were talking a lot about the archetype of players within those game stacks too. And sure, it's nice to have like a Deontay Johnson who can reliably bet on, 6 catches a week, probably getting 70, 80 yards. But in these game environments, not only do we want points, but we want points and we want them fast. So more so those DK Metcalfs, the Nico Collins. You're looking at a Week 17 matchup this year between the Ravens and the Texans in a dome. You got big play weapons on Houston that CJ Stroud can air it out to, who's a faster scorer than Lamar Jackson, who can rip off a 60-yard touchdown at any given moment. Those are the things that they flip the game so fast, and it's so back and forth with big play after big play, those splashes. That's also really important too, is trying to connect with those pieces that can just swing it in any moment and then continue to ignite those fireworks back and forth. It really ends up often being that you think about it was more playoff best ball, but there was that game between the Chiefs and the Bills in the playoffs one year where they were just going back and forth. I think it hit like an 80-point total with 50 of them coming in the last 8 minutes. That's the type of stuff you crave and you get just so excited for. That's what you want to be going for in these Week 16 and 17 matchups. So not only two teams with a bunch of weapons on them, but can you find those games, identify the teams that have the weapons to score fast and just completely change the momentum at any given second. So now we'll dive into, again, the correlation. You should know what that is, why Week 17 and now also Week 16 with those flatter payouts are so important. What are some of the best practices to get into? So we have a few do's and don'ts, only 5 of them here, and we're going to get into the drafting. We'll kind of go through some examples as we go too. So it's not just like, here's the philosophy, but we're not going to talk about any players that you might want to consider, any matchups to not consider. So the first do, obviously, is you got to know those Week 16 and 17 matchups. My guy Mo has an excellent cheat sheet over on his Twitter at Mo _FF. Is that right? On there?
Mo _FFB, and I've got it pulled up right here.
Perfect. There it is in the slideshow. So this is something just to kind of have right in your back pocket, to always have at the ready here, to know what your matchups are. So there's also some great tools that overlay. Pete Overzet has highlighted those that overlay the Week 16, 17 matchups, so you can just see them on your actual draft screen while you're drafting. Those are phenomenal too. But we've highlighted here where we could potentially see some shootout potential. So of course, in Week 17, like Detroit at San Fran, that just seems juicy as all hell, those type of differences. But you do want to know then also, if I get Detroit, let's say I start with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Debo on the way back, maybe I could mix in a little bit of Week 16 because I do got to get to Week 17. Oh, they're facing Chicago. Well, DJ Moore is sitting there in round 3. So having a sense now, not only of the Week 17 matchups and the ones that you could see going crazy, but also who could they correlate with that Week 16. We'll talk about it again. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to try to act smarter than the weatherman and predict the weather in Week 17 and middle of May right now. You could get a little overboard with it, but at minimum, as you're starting to get your anchor pieces in those early rounds, you do want to start to be aware of who could I then add on here at the right price later on in my draft to start to build that game environment and correlate it out. Anything to add there, Mo? I just got to grab my charger real quick. So any points you want to hit, go for it.
No worries. So before we get too deep into the do's and don'ts, I just want to take a look at these strategies in practice. So we talked about the math checking out for these strategies, like teams having higher advance rates and having success, but are the people who are actually succeeding in these tournaments using team stacks and utilizing game stacks? And the short answer is yes. The best in winning BBM lineups are regularly every single season utilizing these strategies. So from last season, BBM4, Fareed Shahid was the guy who ultimately took it down, and he utilized two key game stacks and team stacks. So first off, you can't see the entire lineup in this image, but I just pulled this from his Twitter, him reacting to winning $3 million, and I'm sure freaking out as he became a multimillionaire in one night. But so he had his key stacks were he had a Packers stack utilizing Christian Watson, Jordan Love, and Jaden Reed. And I'll come back to that a little bit later when we talk about targeting specific games. And then he had a game stack without a quarterback, but he used Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and CeeDee Lamb. And last season that was a really popular option as at the 1-2 turn, just because of their week 17 matchup, and it ultimately panned out. And a lot of teams that were in the finals and ended up succeeding in the finals had that game stack. So you're just seeing that teams that are succeeding in these tournaments are utilizing these strategies. And a guy that you brought up throughout this podcast, Pat Kerrane, he won BBM3 2 years ago. He went kind of crazy with the game stacks. 12 of his 18 players came from just 3 different games across the week 17 slate. So he kind of took that strategy to heart. And at the time, I mean, he was one of the pioneers of that strategy. The week 17 stuff was kind of getting pushback still during a BBM3 2 years ago. So he, along with some other sharp guys, were some of the pioneers of this strategy. And obviously it's been working for these last couple of tournaments. I mean, the winners of these tournaments who are now multimillionaires are utilizing these strategies. So, I mean, we're seeing the results. So both the math, the process checks out, and the results check out as well. So, I mean, there's really no arguing against whether or not team stacking and game stacking is successful.
I'm glad you brought that up. Show these examples. It is absolutely the truth here in terms of the results. The past 2 years cannot be argued with. What is interesting, and they started to talk about this on the show as well, is not going overboard with it. And once you see something that works, a lot of people will then start to go overboard. So yes, we have these matchups, and me and you can now maybe identify a handful that were like, yeah, if it works out in our drafts, these seem like games that really could go off, but you also don't want to overdo that. We're already seeing people be like, all right, in Cleveland in week 17 is going to be Miami. We know Tua struggles in cold weather, and that's going to be the worst weather on the slate. Well, yeah, maybe it could be, and that could end up panning out and being sound process because, yeah, Tua does struggle in cold weather. But we could also get an unseasonably warm 50-degree day in Cleveland. I know you live out in Ohio. I mean, you probably know how variant the weather is right around Christmas time, right? Like,
oh yeah, I've had Christmases where it's like completely blanketed in snow, and I've had Christmases where I don't even have to wear a jacket. So
yeah.
it's like it's just completely variable. I mean, specifically to Cleveland, like it's a little different because it's on the water, but like just to the whole point that you're trying to make is, yeah, don't try to predict these factors that aren't really in our control too early. So like you said, it is May, and we're trying to predict these factors that are 7 months down the road. So the only ones that you can really like weigh that in is the games where we know it's going to be in a dome and weather won't be affected in general. So, I mean, the end of the day, you just really need to get the guys that you like, and don't try to predict things that are going to be out of your control. And we don't really know what things are going to look like towards the end of the season. So, and that kind of goes to my image here of my breakdown of the week 16 and week 17 matchups. I've got them broken down into tiers, but it's not something that you need to rigidly adhere to. And I'm not, it's kind of just like to show my opinions on what I think about each matchup. But at the end of the day, we have no clue what we're going to be getting with any of those matchups. And I think that's kind of reflected in the game totals that we're seeing here. That second column for each one, we have the game totals listed. They're all pretty conservative, in my opinion. Like the people who are making these game totals, the bookmakers in Las Vegas, they are the sharpest, most like math forward, math centered people in the world of sports. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're setting these games so incredibly conservatively. Not a single total in the 50s, not a single total in the 30s. And so that's just a result of nobody really knows what's going to happen down the stretch this season. You have to be conservative with how you attack these games because you don't know what offense is going to be banged up. You don't know what defense is going to be an attackable defense. You don't know what injuries there are going to be. There's just so many factors that you can't control that occur throughout the season. So like it's good to understand that, yes, I want to have players in the Baltimore and Houston matchup. Yes, I want to have players in the Detroit and San Francisco matchup, but I can't let things get too out of line. I can't get too out of control because last year we saw on the winning lineup, the team stack from Green Bay, nobody was really anticipating. He had the guys that ended up contributing to Fareed Shaheed winning were Jordan Love and Jaden Reed. Like, two guys that people, like a lot of people throughout the offseason said, oh yeah, these guys might break out, but nobody in the beginning of the year would have said, oh yeah, I think Jaden Reed and Jordan Love will be the guys who play key roles in the winning BBM lineup. We don't know what we're going to get in week 17. So getting too out of line.
Karane's too. You think about the one before that when Karane had a Bucks and Panthers stack, a Sam Darnold-led Panthers team that ultimately was, I don't remember who the quarterback was by the end of the season, a PJ Walker maybe. So, and that still ended up being the nuts. Exactly. No, it's so true. I think, and a good even illuminating point there too. I should just cut you off, but I remember last year I was doing the same thing. A lot of drafters, Chiefs Bengals week 17. You got to have that matchup. And ultimately, what did we see happen? Well, the Chiefs just weren't that explosive offense that a lot of people had come to know those previous years. It took a while for Rashee Rice to round into form. And even when he did, he had a pretty good game in week 17 at 120 yards, about 14 half PPR fantasy points. Isaiah Pacheco had 130 rush yards. He had 13 half PPR points. Pat Mahomes was under 20. Kelsey had 3 catches for 16 yards. And then on the other side, the Bengals, Joe Burrow was hurt. And they ultimately did nothing in weeks. I mean, they had Joe Mixon had like 60 scoreless yards and a few catches. T. Higgins barely played. Nobody had a big day for the Bengals side of things. So if that was the game that you were like, I have to go into my draft making sure I pluck Chiefs and Bengals because that game's going to be the one that you need to have, it ultimately didn't work out for you. Now, I think something that you said that I really gravitated towards, and it kind of plays into this next tip, is like, yes, you do want to have this correlation. You said the one thing we kind of do know is talent. And so if I'm betting on Tyreek Hill, I'm not going to be bumping him down my board because, he might have a bad weather game in Cleveland. That's a talent I believe in. And so I'll definitely draft Tyreek Hill because that's the thing that doesn't change in week 17. As long as they're on the field and they're healthy, talent is talent. Those big games are going to be coming throughout the year and ideally for you in week 17 as well. So you pick those talents that you like early, and then maybe in those middle rounds, and certainly as the draft gets later and later, you get more and more comfortable forcing in that kind of correlation. I still don't want to say forcing in because you never want to force it. You never know what type of value might be falling and whatnot. But I do think you want to use it as a tiebreaker. So let's keep with that Tyreek Hill example. Or maybe you take Waddle in round 3 and you start to set up your anchors. You pay attention to your chart. Okay, who are some week 17 teams that I might see? And then Amari Cooper is sitting there in round 4 for you. And also George Pickens is on there. And let's say you have both those guys in the same tier, maybe even Pickens a ranking higher than Amari Cooper, but same tier. Well, in that case, you have them within neck and neck. Okay, maybe I use that as the tiebreaker. I'm not reaching 7 to 10 picks to get Amari Cooper, but they're both sitting there, and I like them both a lot, and now I can correlate my Tyreek Hill pick. Then, I'm going to go after Amari Cooper and stack that game and hope for good weather, hope for an unseasonably warm day. Conversely, let's say you take Pacheco in round 4 and Pickens is now your round 5 guy to stack that the Chiefs-Steelers matchup coming there. It doesn't seem overly sexy on paper, but I thought Pat Karane kind of talked about it well, and I think you alluded to the same point. You buy your talent that you really like, especially early in the draft, and then you do want to stack it. It's clearly proven to work that you want to stack in week 17, but you don't have to force it in those early rounds. A mistake or in his eyes, a mistake that was getting made a lot is that, the Bengals or the Lions 49ers game on paper. And I do think we should kind of talk about maybe a handful of games that, all things equal, if I'm drafting the right way, I'm not overreaching. What games could we see shooting out? That game is probably the number one on my list too. I think it's a great one, but we're starting to see Sam Laporta go at the top of round 3, like literally pick 25 because the Christian McCaffrey team wants to correlate in that week. And that just to me is crazy. I like Laporta as much as the next guy. He probably is my number 1 tight end, but now he's going a round and a half to 2 rounds earlier than the next closest tight end just for the sake of correlation. I was in a draft yesterday where at the bottom of it, the guy took Jahmyr Gibbs and he took Deebo Samuel as the next pick. And Debo's typically going 20, 22. And I like Debo, and maybe he pays that out and maybe that makes that team different. But then he also took George Kittle at pick 40. It was nuts the way that people are forcing the correlation in by overreaching. And I yes, use it as tiebreakers. And certainly as you're filling out your roster with those late sleepers, you have Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown and Jalen Tolbert, your last round pick, to kind of give yourself, or maybe your boy Ryan over there, Flournoy. Maybe that's the right move. We'll talk about that in a second in terms of rookies and whatnot. But ultimately, you want to stack, of course, because the science is proven. We've seen the results year in and year out. And it's not just the winners. We're not just cherry picking winners. Like you look at the week 17 field and the sharpest minds, almost all those lineups are correlated. You saw how the advance rates improve when you're stacking and then when you're running back. But you can't sacrifice if a great value is falling to your player that you just believe in is a tier to 2 tiers above the guy that would make your lineup correlated. You got to ultimately sacrifice that week 17 correlation. You can find it later on with other pieces that we'll talk about those later targets. But do you feel like I'm kind of summarizing that idea of not over forcing it and ultimately do use it as tiebreakers? But again, that don't force it, especially early on while you're trying to load your kind of key anchors for your team. You don't want to make sure you don't want to force correlation, whereas you could have taken a guy that you really like just that much more value that fell to you.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. I mean, basically what we're getting at with all this is that you need to have week 17 correlation on your roster if you want to have a chance at winning these tournaments. But at the end of the day, you can't sacrifice just taking players who are straight up better or players that you value better. And one thing that the podcast that we keep referencing with Karain and Eric from Spike Week, he just talked about if you're just doing drafts to get your stacks off, you're basically just throwing away your player evaluation out the window. What's the point of even forming opinions and doing projections and doing all this research if you're just gonna draft your team based on who's playing in week 17? At the end of the day, you still need to get quality players on your lineup, and week 17 should week 17 correlation should be a secondary thing that you're considering behind just overall player talent and quality. And that's especially true in the early rounds. In the later rounds where the drop off in talent isn't as significant between pick to pick, it's okay to reach 10 spots or so, or even 15 spots ahead of ADP to get a guy that's correlated. The example that I use in my article that's going to come out tomorrow or the next day on Roto Street Journal, it's the difference between the players just relative to their ADP. So I believe it's the difference between Michael Pittman and then some other guy who's 20 spots away. So the difference between 20 picks in round 1 to 3 is significantly different. There's significantly bigger difference in value than the difference in 20 picks in rounds 14 to 16. The pick by pick value difference is so much more significant in the early rounds. So don't reach in the early rounds just to finish your stacks. It's okay in the later rounds where most of these guys are going to be duds and we're just taking them for contingent value or potentially back-weighted production, which we're going to get to in a second. But it's just I think the whole point of this is don't force stacks and don't value any of these matchups as the holy grail. You don't want your you don't want your ownership percentage of these matchups to get completely out of line, because at the end of the day, like I illustrated with the point about Green Bay earlier, we have no idea which one of these matchups is truly going to be the nuts when it comes to week 17. We think that it's going to be Baltimore and Houston now, Detroit and San Francisco, Dallas and Philly. But once we get to week 17, after 17 NFL football games have been played, new data is available, injuries are taking place, we have no idea what those matchups are going to look like.
I know, exactly. I think that's a great way to summarize it. And you already kind of spouted them off. I'll pull it in full screen here just to see the calendar one last time here before we lay out. Even though we just talked about how you don't want to overforce it and try to predict it, you highlighted a few: Baltimore, Houston, Detroit, San Fran. Those are some really popular ones. One that I find that also flows to the draft fairly well too, that I've been really labeling a lot lately, is Arizona and the Rams. I feel like that game has so much, the interdivision, the dome, the two offenses that could get cooking, big play type players all over the field. I love that one as well. So that was one last one I did want to highlight. Again, I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive to why you're trying to pin that, because you never know. And that's what's great about this is, yeah, maybe you land Calvin Ridley in round 5 and suddenly you're mixing in a couple Jags in Tennessee stacks. It wasn't your number one to go after, but you're correlating, you're giving yourself a shot that's the game that goes off. Maybe it's a hideous one like Indianapolis against the Giants. Daniel Jones bounces back. Jonathan Taylor's having a massive day. They push each other to the brink. It doesn't look great on paper. And sure, if it's equal pricing, and I've already started my draft with Baltimore and Houston, like I'm going to keep going after that, but you just really never know. So it's really just about getting those pieces in there, trying to draft as if you're right, and able to hit those. So is there any other ones though that I know it's like kind of counterintuitive to the points we're making, but is there any like matchups that you're just like, yeah, I really want to label that one?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it on this show before. Just the Arizona and Jacksonville stacks are just ones that I've just been a fan of, just because of in terms of prices as well as the offensive quality that I'm expecting. So, and I don't mind, like you said, the matchup with the Rams is good for Arizona, so that's one that I'm a fan of. And I think the matchup with Tennessee for Jacksonville is fine. Like I think that's obviously has a chance to be of shootout potential. So yeah, those are both still on my radar as high quality ones. But one other thing that we haven't really gotten to yet is it's kind of like more of a macro thing. Like so the way that we succeed in these tournaments is that our team is firing on all cylinders through weeks 15 through 17. And how do we do that? And a concept that you may have heard thrown around in the best ball space is back-weighted production. So who are the players that are going to be firing on all cylinders, producing their best fantasy days in the final weeks of the season? And typically, I mean, obviously, like there's some outliers and just some guys who are standalone, just like randomly doing really well down the stretch. But typically, like the trends indicate that they're rookies as well as handcuffs. So that's why you might freak out when you see Marvin Harrison going at the 1-2 turn, or some of these guys like Lad McConkey is going in the 60s or 70s in most drafts. You see all these rookies who are being drafted too highly relative to redraft, but a point that's brought up everywhere. This is a different game at the end of the day. We want the guys who are going to be having their best production in the fantasy playoffs. So getting those guys on your roster is incredibly important, and grabbing the rookies has proven to be successful in doing so. And because they're going to be out there running routes, like especially on these bad teams, just like think about it. If a team isn't really succeeding in terms of just like their season's over by the time week 14, week 15, 16, 17 roll around, what are they going to be doing? They're going to be getting their young guys out there, seeing what they have, and preparing for next season. And then the other kind of pool of players that fall into this back-weighted production category, and it might not necessarily be back-weighted, it could be throughout the whole season depending on when it happens, is these handcuffs. Just because these running backs especially, and it applies to wide receivers to a degree, but especially running backs, they can find massive success down the stretch if either a bad running back loses their job or if an injury occurs. There's massive upside to be had. And some of these guys that I think like they're getting kind of overlooked. There's the the backup running backs in some of the premier offenses in the NFL are just kind of going undrafted, not necessarily undrafted, but just going really late in drafts, not being considered. And so the three names that come to mind for me are Tyler Algier, the clear backup to Bijan Robinson. I mean, Algier's got a 1,000-yard season under his belt, and I know that was in a very like high rushing volume attack with Arthur Smith, but I think he's still an okay running back, and I think he would succeed if Bijan Robinson goes down. And then the other two guys that come to mind are CEH with the Chiefs, just another potent offense that we want pieces of, and Eli Mitchell of the 49ers. And these are all kind of injury handcuff guys. But there's also guys that are just backup running backs right now that could end up taking over the backfield. Are there any names that come to mind for just guys for you that you're targeting just because you think that they can take over a backfield? The guy that comes to mind for me is Jonathan Brooks. I mean, he's kind of was drafted to be the number one guy, but I mean, he's going to have a slow ramp up just because of his injury. Is there any other guys that you're looking to draft for their back-weighted production just because they're going to take over? We'll make our draft pick here and then we'll talk about it. But I think, I think Jefferson here.
Yeah, I agree with Jefferson there too. I do like going ASB, not to force the stack, but I love how everything sets up for him too. But ultimately, to wrap this whole conversation up and get to put a bow on this back-weighted conversation, I think you summarized it perfectly. Rookies, handcuffs. In terms of rookies, I do love it. You mentioned the Jaden Reed example of last year, how that carried him over the edge. I do, of course, love Marv early on. I'm all about getting him in that round 1-2. I'm not, ignoring him, but I don't really leave a draft within that 150 to 160 range, where that's where Jaden Reed was going last year. I'm trying to find that next one. I love Jalen Polk, Jermaine Burton, and Roman Wilson in that range. I get one of them in pretty much every single draft, especially if it correlates with what I'm setting up in terms of a team stack and or run back. I try to go after those guys, but even if it doesn't correlate, I just want one of those pieces because those guys seem to fit the bill to me. Javon Baker a little bit later for the Patriots as well. Maybe even Malik Washington, Ryan Flournoy for the Cowboys we've talked about a few times. But also those rookie running backs that end up starting to come into their own. Tyron Tracy, Bucky Irving. They have that kind of handcuff upside, sure, but the standalone benefits. You mentioned Eli Mitchell. Honestly, on this show, I brought it up a few times. I'm not a huge fan of Eli Mitchell. The guy can't even seem to hold up under a backup workload. Never mind getting the feature work. I'm really intrigued by Isaac Guerrero, this freakish athlete, runs a 4.3, 8 at 230 pounds. The top RAS score, I believe, of all time, relative athletic score. So we already had Kyle Shanahan say, I can't wait to see what I can do with this speed. So I'm very, very intrigued by him, more so than Eli Mitchell as a handcuff. The other guy I wanted to bring up is Khalil Herbert too. In those middle rounds, the 130s to 150s, like I talked about those receivers, 150 to 160. Right before then, I feel like there's often this pocket of running backs, Blake Corum, Jalen Wright, and Marshawn Lloyd. Three really intriguing rookie guys that, they're going to be backups to start, but an injury to any of those starters opens the door in an explosive offense for three. It wasn't the best running back class ever, but these guys are also very intriguing talents within their schemes. So should Kyron Williams destroy Arizona in week 17? Sure. But if he's down, Blake Corum's going to probably have 30 points against him. So I like that pocket of running backs followed by that next pocket of wide receivers as rookies. And then I wanted to shout out Khalil Herbert, and we're going to make our pick in just a second as one last guy I really like. Just because, one, I think he could get traded to the Cowboys this offseason. A lot of mumblings there. But if not, he does back up DeAndre Swift, who has historically been a bit injury prone, gets Detroit in week 16, Seattle, two bad run defenses. I could see that being meaningful down the stretch. I like Evans here. I'm a huge fan of Evans. I know you haven't typically loved him. Are you cool with him here, though? Or is there somebody else calling to you?
I'm fine with either him or Achane. That's who I usually go with.
I've been finding
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've seen Achane making it to round 3. Now, maybe not as far as us. Adams was there? Shit. I must have not scrolled up nearly high enough. I did not see Devontae Adams there.
Yeah, we must have not been at the top of the board there, but that's okay.
I still like Evans, no worries. But oh man, I would have probably preferred Adams, as I'm sure you would have too. But we'll have to make sure we're scrolled up. But yeah, those were just a few toss outs of that contingent upside that I could see. And similar to those, the last rookie is Ricky Persio as well. I want to toss him out there. Can kind of fit into those Detroit San Fran stacks. Wow,
massive massive
Yeah.
contingent value. Like if one of those guys goes down, and we've seen Debo miss games at times, like, and there we go again with Laporta going early in the third round, so people can get these stacks off. I mean, it's kind of out of control at this point, but yeah, when it comes to Pearsall, massive contingent value in my opinion, because if one of those guys goes down, he's immediately slotting in as the second receiver in that offense. And I mean, just who doesn't want a part of this San Francisco offense? So I'm getting to him in the stacks where I have some of these Detroit guys, and I don't really like, if I can't get to the early weapons that are in the San Francisco offense, I'm finding myself getting to Pearsall just so I can have that correlation. And we've talked about not forcing. Oh, and here we are. I'll get back to that thought. Here we are on the clock. Jalen Waddle. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I went Waddle. Yeah. And I'm pulling in the big overview side. I dropped the draft for just a second while I tried to get this view for us. But yeah, I love this start. Again, I do wish I had seen Adams here instead of Evans, but I'm fine with Evans too. I think that's a nice, and they set up pretty nicely with Dallas and Carolina as potential stacks later. But yeah, keep going. We just got our Waddle pick, and you were making some good points there.
To be honest, I completely lost my train of thought there, but but I just wanted to I'll talk about that Laporta pick. I mean, I think we're gonna see. Oh, I was talking Ricky Pearsall. It's just like getting these. You don't need to force these prime, like the stacks with the primary weapons who are incredibly expensive. You can get the secondary pieces later, and it's still a high quality offense. And like we've harped on, we have no idea what these offenses and defenses are going to look like when week 17 rolls around. So, I mean, just like you are like we said, you want to have the week 17 team stacks and game stacks, but it doesn't have to be the most expensive pieces. So just don't force the ADP and just like let the draft board come to you. If you can't get Laporta on your team that has the Niners guys, like it doesn't matter. Like you're gonna rip a bunch of drafts later on. Like it doesn't like, don't freak out and try and just like push Laporta. I know we keep going back to Laporta, just but like whoever, just don't push whoever up your ranks just to try and get these stacks, because at the end of the day, the stacks that people are going to be targeting, like we've talked about, just like you don't necessarily need to like target specific games. We don't know what's going to be happening, but these are high quality offenses. So getting the players in later rounds who have massive contingent value is still a good way to build your roster. You just don't need to force these picks in the early rounds.
110%. We got a couple people commenting on it. If you guys got questions, get them on here. Charlie saying he loves this breakdown. Great to see you, Charlie. I know you. Me and you DM about best ball all the time. Still waiting to have that beer up in Maine with you someday. But great to see you. Thanks for being on in here. And if you guys enjoy this breakdown, first time I've called for it. I resisted for the first 46 minutes. But if you enjoy what you're hearing, that thumbs up button really does help us out, guys. Please do consider hitting it if you found any of this helpful. And if not, please let us know what we could do differently, how we could be more helpful for you. But if everything does boil down to those playoff weeks, hopefully we gave you some good tips, some players to consider, the type of the archetypes to consider, not just the specific player takes, the teams to target, the matchups that could boil over, those type of things. If you enjoyed it, please do consider that thumbs up button to help your guys out. And Mass Football Guy, great to see you again as well. Hey, what's going on? But definitely let us know. I know it's the best ball draft, but if any of you guys have keeper questions, any of those type of situations, we are happy to. Your dynasty drafts coming up. We're happy to answer any questions as we go through the draft. So we are one pick away. So I'll bring in our potential options. We're now on the clock, and we have Flowers, T. Higgins, Tank Dell, Pickens, and Cooper, as well as Pacheco, who I do really love as well. I mean, I love Tank Dell, and I'd like Flowers too. So I like a lot of these options. Anybody speaking to you?
I don't mind Pacheco, Cooper, or Dell. I'm not really on Flowers.
Okay, so I'll X out of Flowers. I like going Pacheco and then hoping we can potentially get Cooper.
Seeing what we get at receiver on the way back.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe it's Pickens. Maybe we correlate that way. But I do like trying to get at least one running back in my first 6 picks, even if the other 5 are wide receivers. So, yeah, I like going Pacheco there and hoping. I've seen Cooper fall. Now, if the team at 3 knows about correlation, he might not make it past us. So how upset are you that we didn't get Devontae Adams instead of Mike Evans here? I
It's not the
apologize
end of the
that it
world.
wasn't all the way scrolled up, but does that? I know you're an Adams guy, and so am I. Am I stewing a
It's
little
not,
too much on it?
no, it's not the end of the world to me. I mean, I've got my fair share of Devontae Adams in drafts. It's really not that big of a deal. The question that I was going to ask you, you kind of brought it up, just like general roster construction stuff. Have you seen the charts that Hayden Winks does this every year? One of the really great guys at Best Ball. Let's make our pick, and then I'll get into it a little bit. Who do we got queued up here?
So I like Christian Kirk. I like Terry McLaurin. I'm not a huge fan of Keenan Allen. I wouldn't hate James Cook, but I wouldn't love it. Jaden Reed does correlate with Justin Jefferson as well, but I think we can get those Packers peaches later.
Let's
Kirk McLaurin.
McLaurin.
All right.
I've been getting a lot of Kirk, but something that you'll see on
I think we ultimately got autoed Kirk.
It's okay.
So,
it's okay.
Yeah.
But something. All right, I've got 2 points to make first. First is the charts from Hayden Winks that he does every year. One of the really sharp guys over at Underdog, works for Underdog actually. So he's not in these drafts, but he's providing a lot of information to all of us drafters. He posted about when were the optimal times to grab running backs. Like, he posts just about like the results from BBM4 last year, and it's looking like 0 RB and hero RB is the way to go. So and that's what I mean. It's what most drafters are employing these days. But I mean, even just a couple of days ago, I sent you a draft. I saw a guy go 5 running backs in the first 6 rounds. So that's kind of out of line, but it's looking like it's optimal to go hero RB, which is what we're doing here, and that's what I'm doing in the vast majority of my drafts. But the point I wanted to make on Terry McLaurin, and it's something that JJ Zacharyson brought up on his podcast recently as well, a mailbag from last week. We've talked about it in the last couple of shows about the potential for target concentration in Washington next year. McLaurin had a 21% target share, I want to say. I don't have the number in front of me from last season, but there was just like a ridiculous number of guys getting targets. And what Zacharyson brought up is that now that Cliff Kingsbury is the offensive coordinator in Washington, he expects, and I expect as well, a much more usage of an RPO style offense. Cliff Kingsbury's offenses in Arizona were always top tier in the league in terms of RPO usage, and there's some pretty significant and compelling correlation between teams that run a high rate of RPO usage and just a team having an individual target hog, just like 1 or 2 guys who are amassing a bunch of the target share. We've seen that in the last 2 years in Miami. They run a ton of RPO, and basically all the targets are concentrated between 2 guys. So the fact that Sam Howell's out of the picture, I don't think we're going to be seeing this offense where there's literally 11 different guys getting targets in the game. Yes, that happened in a Washington Commanders game last year with 11 guys getting targets in the game. I think we're going to see concentrated targets for Terry McLaurin. So I'm starting to get a lot more Terry McLaurin, and I'm excited about him in the 5th round.
I love Terry as well. I would have probably preferred him to Kirk. So we'll try to get on top of this in terms of the auto drafting, in terms of Adams and Terry would have been preferred. I do also love running it back with the later Arizona pieces there, but had Ridley fallen to us, I do like, again, that Jags and Tennessee matchup. The Jags also get the Raiders in that Week 16 matchup. So they're also setting up for some nice shootout style games, in my opinion. So yeah, we'll get on our auto queue. I like both of them though, and I actually personally don't have a lot of Kirk. I have more Terry because I do love him. Yeah, do you? Okay, so we're the opposite ends.
I've got a bunch of Kirk just because of my affinity for those Jag stacks.
Yeah. So right now we don't have really much, if any, correlation. I know that's the theme of the show. We're not gonna have to force it for the sake of just getting correlation on here. But I'm not seeing a ton that would really help us with that mission of correlation right now either. I'm
not seeing the queue right now, but I mean, at this point in the draft, I'm not forcing it either.
We got Kenneth Walker, who I think's fallen, and I don't have a lot of, honestly, as much as I like him. I don't hate going there, even though I do like running backs later. Ladd, Godwin with Evans, Aaron Jones with Justin Jefferson. Those are a few that stand out to me, and then maybe Hopkins on the way back. Any that you like?
Walker or Godwin's cool with me.
All right, let's do Walker here, and then
Yeah,
look.
it doesn't make a ton of sense, but yeah, a handful of picks past ADP, like why not?
Yeah, and I just don't have a lot of him yet, and would like to bump my exposure. So doesn't necessarily correlate again with what we have, but I like their setup in week 16 and 17 as well. We do have they do face Minnesota, so week 16 you get a little bit of correlation there with the Seahawks, and then they get I believe it's Chicago in week 17. So that's not a horrendous matchup, especially if Caleb Williams in that offense take off this year, as they might. So yeah, I don't mind. It does give us a little week 16 correlation, so we've started to sneak in some of that, which is good.
And yeah, I mean, I don't, and we talked about it. I really prefer to have a tight end by the end of this kind of tier. I mean, I don't mind grabbing an Njoku or a Ferguson as well, but I would love to get Ingram or Thomas with this pick, and that would set us up. There's a lot of stuff you can do backdoor with the Titans, so we can set that up as well. And I know,
yeah, I like that as well. The only other one I'd consider is Hopkins, just because that's that week 17 correlation with Kirk. But I don't hate Ingram at all here. It sets us up to get Trevor Lawrence later, a nice value stack you've been creating. You prefer Ingram to Hopkins here?
Yeah, that's where I'm usually going, because I just really like to get out of here with a tight end in the first 8 rounds or so. And
me too.
I mean, like I said, we can grab Njoku or Ferguson later on where I'm comfortable, but I don't know about you. I've talked about it at length, preferring to have a tight end in this range. Are you like, there's a lot of like late round tight ends that are popping up in these last couple weeks that people seem to be interested in, but I like, it just makes me a little queasy, like waiting on tight end.
I agree with you. And in fact, there's a lot of good research. You talk about Hayden Winks. He talked a lot about how waiting at tight end has been the optimal way, taking 3, sometimes even 4 guys in the last few rounds has worked out well. And you look about the guys last year, Trey McBride, Jake Ferguson, and of course, that kind of boosted that strategy last year. But that was also with, the opportunity cost of a Kelsey going in round 1 and Andrews going in round 2. These guys are now falling to rounds 4 and 5. And yeah. I would much rather get that safe. There's very few tight ends that have that 25 plus point upside. And it is the position, Crane and Eric talked about this, that, yeah, if you don't nail it, you can usually get by with a tight end. Laporta was in the winning lineup last year and only had like 15. It wasn't like a massive 30-point blow up, but a 30 massive point blow up certainly doesn't hurt. Ingram doesn't typically profile as that 30 plus point blow up type of guy, but we saw him 2 years ago win a tournament because he had a 35-point day against Tennessee, who they're meeting up against in week 17 this year. So not that means necessarily anything, but I'm with you. I definitely like getting that tight end early. I also wouldn't preclude us if he falls to us right in this 101 range to get an Njoku and having an Ingram and an Njoku. We've seen Njoku have 25-point days. That correlates well with Jalen Waddle for week 17 as well. And then we're set. We have 2 of those rounds 7 to 9 guys. We don't have to be playing, dart throws. Maybe we even still, I wouldn't necessarily want or need a 3 tight end build there, but to build into that more of that correlation, maybe Jonnu Smith later on as well. One of my favorite late round guys, speed in the McDaniel system, the fastest tight end miles per hour twice last year. So he intrigues me late as well to continue building on these stacks, these team stacks. So those are just a few rapid thoughts before that question, the tight end position.
Yeah, before we move on to something else, I just want to, you kind of alluded to it, but I want to kind of hammer the point home, is we can't view the failure of some of the early tight ends and the success of late tight end. We can't value that the same last year versus this year, because the tight end landscape is completely different. Like you said, there was a handful of tight end, like we had a tight end going in the first round Andrews was a second-round pick in most drafts, and now you see Laporta and Kelsey going in the third round. But I mean, there's no one in those super early picks. So just the market at tight end is just so vastly different than it was last year. So I just don't. It's kind of apples to oranges in my opinion. So and who do you got queued up here?
I kind of like Jonathan Brooks. We get a little week 17 correlation. We have 2 good running backs. So if he's a late bloomer, it doesn't kill us. And that goes with our Mike Evans pick.
Yeah, that's fine with me. And then just kind of be done with quarterback for a while or running back for a while.
Yeah, probably. I mean, there is the idea of potentially having 4 guys now and then not going running back maybe the rest of the draft.
Yeah. I mean, we'll play the draft board as it comes. You can't get too far ahead of yourself, but this is kind of like the range where things start to dry up. So,
yeah, exactly. The only guy that's still sitting there, as you can see, I have queued up, is Zach Moss, one of my favorite picks of this year. And one thing I like about him, and another strategy, we keep referencing that show, and there he goes, anyways. Unfortunately, Eric talked a lot about. I forget the exact lingo he used for it, but it's essentially like backwards planning your draft. Where let's say you really like Marvin.
Bottom up.
What's that?
Building bottom up.
Building bottom up. Yes, that's the way to think about it. And we'll make our pick, and I'll illuminate a little bit more about how I kind of interpreted that, and really do love the way he's thinking about it. I also don't. I know again we just talked about getting away from running back, but Mostert correlates with Waddle team stacking if he's there for us. But I also do love Jaden Reed late, so I don't have to do that by any means. This would have been if we had gotten Terry. I guess we wouldn't have gone Ingram though. But Jaden Daniels would have been nice there. I don't know who Mostert's there. I like Curtis Samuel, just even though it doesn't correlate with our lineup that well. Is anything calling to you?
Mostert or Lockett are my picks.
Yeah, Lockett kind of creates a little bit of that correlation too with here. So I'll toss him in. Yeah, we got it. I like that. That week Lockett's, 16. Yeah.
Lockett's such an easy click in rounds 9 or 10. I mean, just like you know what you're getting. You're gonna get at worst like a flex caliber player on like across the full season, like unless he gets hurt. And this I mean, like, what did you see out of JSN that makes you think that Lockett is like should be valued this lowly? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm an Ohio State guy. It's literally like right behind me, and I didn't see enough out of JSN last year to make me think that Lockett's going to be completely dust. Like, I don't know. You know, he's the king of beating his ADP. Like, if you need a receiver in this range, which in my opinion, just like how our last 3 picks have gone, running back, tight end, running back, I think we needed a receiver in that range. So he's just like a Mr. Consistency. We're going to get some spike weeks here and there. So I'm a fan of Lockett in this range.
I am too. Now, I would the only pushback, I love Lockett. We talked about him, you know, in one of our earliest drafts when we were doing the big board, the NFL big board drafts. That Lockett was my like unsexy value that, you know, alongside Cortland Sutton, who I still also like as an unsexy value, but I'm fully there. And we've seen even last year Lockett had a couple 20-point days. So like there's a very real chance that spike comes against the horrendous Minnesota Vikings secondary in week 16. And that's what pushes us. It pushes Justin Jefferson to go off, and that pushes us into week 17. We had Walker. I think Lockett's a great pick. Now, there are a few times, like the fact that 4 of our first 5 guys were receivers, I am comfortable. I've had a few builds where like I've done that, or sometimes I've had a couple this weekend that I ended up loving 5 straight receivers, and I didn't touch the position until like Dontavian Wicks 130, Roman Wilson 150, and then I have 7 receivers that I really liked, and I don't feel like I have to have 8 at that point. So yes, I mean, all the points you made on Lockett are great. I think he's a good pick. He's who I wanted to go there, if not Mostert, but I like Jalen Wright, so I'm cool with it. But yeah, like I don't know that we had to go Lockett just because we had taken 3 running backs and a tight end with our last, 4 or 5 picks, just because we had started so strong in it. That's kind of why I like starting so strong, is because these receivers do seem to flatten out. But I am with you that I think Lockett's in a tier above pretty much all the guys going in this range. So I'm happy to take him where we took him and maybe give us a shot at a better week 16, week 17 Seattle stack. So, but yeah, if we hadn't touched receiver until 130, I would have felt maybe okay about it. And I do also want to like highlight, as I said, what's his name for a reason, Wicks, because I want to get some Green Bay pieces soon to start that run back in our Week 17 matchup. I love that matchup. That's why I love getting Justin Jefferson at the top of drafts, because I really like getting some Green Bay pieces and so many explosive ones. Wicks, Lloyd, they're available really late. So those are guys I want to start kind of considering and thinking about.
Yeah. I think just like generally though, for the Green Bay room, wide receiver room, it's looking like it's going to be all better and best ball type of players, and that's a term that gets thrown around pretty loosely. But you look at the expected fantasy points, and we can go ahead and make our pick here.
You don't like him. We talked about backloaded production, and I know he's not a rookie, but Chubb comes in mid-season, goes nuts down the stretch, correlates with Jalen Waddle, or we could get our boy Trevor Lawrence. I think he's going to make it to us, or Dobbs is a nice Packers. What are the three?
Not
Do you
Nick
hate Chubb that much? No. Oh shit, he's gonna. You're discounting Chubb too much. I'm taking him. I know you hate it, but
where do you have him in your rankings? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, probably 100. Again, it's just that back-weighted production of like, I get he's older than Jonathan Brooks. He tore his ACL though like 5 weeks ahead of him, and it was a much more grisly knee injury. But this is Nick Chubb, and I'm not banking on him being there the first 4 weeks. I guess it doesn't work great because we do have Brooks already on this team too. So now we're banking on like 2 guys that might be more back-weighted, but I think people are sleeping on Chubb, and I know you just said you didn't want him, so I apologize for forcing that one in.
Not in the world.
But I could see him, again, it correlates with our Miami stack. I think we got to go Trevor Lawrence.
Got to go Lawrence. Yep.
Yeah, we got to get that done. I do think it correlates, though, nicely with the Miami stack we already have here, like Chubb late season. Everyone just thinks he's so unsexy now, and he is for a lot of reasons, but there is the world where, let's say he does have a great training camp and is back by week. What if he's back by week 1? Probably not, but like, what if he is? Chubb will be going 30, 40 picks above this if you get good reports. And if we get bad reports, he might slip another 10 to 15. But I think there's way more potential ADP gain right now with Chubb than there is loss, unless it's like horrendous reports.
I don't know about that. He's totally going on the preseason pup, is he not? Like, once he hits the preseason pup, he's gonna fall.
I don't know that he is. I don't know that he's even gonna go on the pup. Maybe, but
not
he's
the
already
regular
running,
season pup, just like the preseason pup.
Yeah, and so he'll probably fall for that little pocket. But what if it's like we'll avoid the regular season pup? Then he's gonna start shooting up boards. I'm with you. Yeah. Okay, so who would you have preferred? Probably just getting our Trevor Lawrence stack, right? But
or Tua.
Who went that you would have? What's that?
Tua.
You would have? Yeah, I see that going Tua and Trevor.
Or Dobbs too.
Yeah, I didn't even queue up Tua. I didn't even think about him in Waddle. But I don't know. You hate Tua. That's why I didn't.
I hate Tua, but I mean, like at the end of the day, I'm not gonna leave drafts. Like I'm not going to end my draft season in best ball without Tua on like a lot of my Tyreek Waddle teams, like not necessarily them together, but just like on the teams where I have the Miami weapons. I mean, like it just like we understand I like to think we understand the game theory well enough to understand that we should have Tua on the teams where we have the Miami weapons. So I mean, like I dislike Tua, but at the end of the day, you got to have him. I mean, you know what that offense can do. So yeah,
I'm with you there. I think in hindsight, Tua would probably been a better pick there. I can admit that.
This is the range where it's starting for me to get comfortable with Chubb. I've been like kind of like 120 is like where that I thought I've always, like I remember when we did our first pre-draft draft, it was like in the 90s that Chubb was going. I was like, what the hell?
He was going in the 60s, dude. Maybe that's part of why I'm in there. I looked at some of my earlier drafts, and I hadn't been taking him there. He was going like 67 to 70.
That is bonkers.
I know.
So, I mean, this is the range where I'm starting to feel more comfortable. So I'm not like irate that we took Nick Chubb here. Like, it's like, I think this is where he should be going, somewhere around pick 120. So like, But like, I mean, still his ADP is hovering around 100. So I'm still waiting for that dip on Nick Chubb. And maybe this is where we start to see it. Like maybe May 20th rolls around and people are finally starting to realize like, yeah, Nick Chubb maybe not be the same runner that we saw get 5 yards a carry every single year for the entirety of his career. So we'll see where he slips this, but that'll be definitely a price to keep your eye on throughout the summer.
No doubt about it. Sadly, Wicks just went too, so our options for a run back in Green Bay are starting to get slim. Yeah, I'll pull in the queue. I did queue up Lloyd as a potential run back. We do have the Bears with Cole Kmet as a potential week 17 with the Seattle Seahawks as well. I mean, Perseal doesn't do much, even though I like him in this range, but doesn't do much correlation wise.
I'm really cool with any of the guys you've got queued.
I'd say we go Lloyd. We got to get some sort of Green Bay on here. And there's really, I mean, Bo Melton in the last round, maybe.
Can't forget about Bo.
Yeah. Now, this is another reason why I don't love the Chubb one is we already had three picks. Yeah, I'm talking about myself making the Chubb, not you at all, because I know that was not what you wanted. I got a little bit too, week 16 correlated, but like if Wright falls to us, like I want to go him, but then we have 6 running backs, and it's like, I mean, I wouldn't even hate that. Like I think we're probably looking at a 3 QB build with Lawrence, probably Geno to stack him up, and Baker with Mike. So I think we'll be fine with a 3 QB build that we can get a couple more weapons for Evans and maybe Geno here, or even JJ McCarthy in the last couple of rounds.
Yeah.
Even Levis wouldn't be uncorrelated, right? My boy Will Levis wouldn't be uncorrelated, but we'd be looking at like a 3-6-7-2, which again, I'd be okay with this roster. But I mean, if Wright falls to us, do we go him, or is that just too many running backs too early?
Will you pull up the available players, so we can see who we're picking against potentially?
Yeah. So we got Mooney. I like Rome. And we do have what's his name? Pacheco. So Roman is not bad there. Fry would have been some decent correlation. Oh, we're on the clock. So Wright went. So do we go Roman to correlate with the running back, or do you like just going like Stafford, even though it's nothing for us?
No, I think we've got some options later in the draft. I don't mind. Like we can set up Geno and Fant like really late.
Yeah, your boy Noah Fant. You got to get him on here somehow, right?
Yeah. To finish off what we've got. And we don't even necessarily need Fant. I mean, just Geno stacked with Kenneth Walker and Lockett might be enough, but we'll see how the board plays out. But yeah, don't mind getting Wilson there to go. I'm starting to get more interested. There's signs on both sides of Roman Wilson, like pieces that are really intriguing and pieces that are not that intriguing. Like the really intriguing piece is that no competition for those slot routes, and there's buzz coming out that he could play both inside and outside for the Steelers. But the not so intriguing piece is if he's relegated to the pure slot role, like what's the slot role worth in Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin, Arthur Smith conducted offense? Like what is that actually worth at the end of the day? And like we know that they're setting up, like philosophically, we saw what they did in the draft. We know what they've done for years. Like they're setting up to run the ball. And I think Wilson's got the run blocking skills to be out there a ton and benefit. But I mean, unless he's getting outside, I mean, yeah, there's a very realistic chance for a very ugly outcome for Roman Wilson. But I mean, like we said, just like in terms of that back-weighted production and the opportunity that's available in Pittsburgh, I mean, why not take the shot?
Yeah, and we've just seen so many slot receivers, Deontay, Antonio Brown, 2 very good talents. So like we can't just be like, oh, slot receiver is going to go nuts in Mike Tomlin's offense. But he talked about how that's the type of routes. You know, he highlighted that Roman Wilson in those intermediate to short areas of the game knows how to work and find the space. And I don't hate the idea. We talked about contingent upside and guys that could gain a lot of value mid-season or potentially when we're drafting this early between now and the start of the season. You're trying to find some of that too. And I know me and you are in the same page that we think Justin Fields is going to see some time at some point and potentially from week one. They're going to give him a chance to compete. And if Russell Wilson is what Russell Wilson was last year, it's not that hard to beat out. Not that Justin Fields was lighting the world on fire either. But this does set us up too. Now that we have Rome, again, correlates with Pacheco, and now Justin Fields, and it's like there's really just no one with the upside, in my opinion, and that 197 sometimes even falls to like the last round.
No one.
We're looking at a 3 QB build anyways, maybe even the patented 4. So
no one with upside in that range. Do not discount your boy Danny Dimes.
Oh no, of course. I mean, he is a fantasy juggernaut. Like he has been in the past. So we shall see. We do have Baker kind of approaching here. 5 picks away. I feel like he's a nice, sturdy, like safe option. Like Lawrence, I like, and he's got some huge ceiling games on his resume. And what if it all just pans out now? Like I do really like Lawrence as our number 1. I think Baker's like a phenomenal, even though he's just stuck in the mud. Compliment. Well, we got to hope he makes it to us. I don't know which team has Godwin. Geno just went too, so that's going to make Baker even more important. I know. It's unfortunate, but honestly, I don't love Geno. There's talks. I don't buy into any of them, but like they did trade for Sam Howell. If Geno does turn into Geno Smith of like most of his career, and not just the last couple of years, this is a new regime. It wouldn't shock me if Geno's nothing by midseason. And I think there's JJ later with Justin Jefferson, so we got that option. And then there's like the game stacking idea of Will Levis in our Jags here. Even if we don't have a ton of Titans or any Titans, Levis does fit the bill of like if he's pushing it, our Jags are probably going. We have Deshaun Watson on the other side of the Miami matchup. So yeah, now it is our pick. I do think securing Baker would make a lot of sense here.
Yeah, I like Baker, and McMillan is a guy that I'm mixing in the last round of drafts. So I
like that too.
We don't necessarily have to go that route, but he's definitely like a guy that will be. Yeah, I'm already doing it, and for this draft in specific, should be on our radar for the last round.
Yeah, and I do think this now makes a good prime time to potentially get our next tight end. Although I do love Marvin Mims, and that actually brings up the point that got glossed over because we had to make our pick. The drafting, backload drafting or whatever it was called. What was the term?
Bottom up drafting.
Bottom up drafting. Like I know I love Zach Moss in those middle rounds. I know I like Marvin Mims. So in these late rounds, so I have been mixing in like a bit more, especially if I have the chance at Jamar Chase, a little bit more T Higgins than I had been getting exposed to. I could see, Denver, if Bo Nix ends up being even close to the real deal. I like Sean Payton and what he's done with previous teams. So I've been mixing a lot of Marvin Mims and getting those. So we did see, I was going to say Musgrave going real late, and that would have given us a weapon here. Mims is just a complete one-off, although we could, I don't know if there's any Bengals we could mix him with. We could stack Cade Otton as well, though, with Baker.
Yeah, let's do that, and then we don't go McMillan later.
Okay, perfect.
I'm not trying to triple stack Baker Mayfield. So finishing off our Baker stack.
Oh, did you not want Otton? I thought you said let's go that. So I took
no. I'm saying that takes McMillan off my board because I'm not trying to triple stack Baker Mayfield.
I gotcha.
I don't know about you, but that's not an offense I'm trying to triple stack.
I don't know, man. By the end of the season, I mean, Baker finishes the QB 13, if I'm not mistaken, in points per game, and they only got better as the year went. And that's one of the ones I totally get your point. I probably don't want to, but let's say something happens to Godwin, and now he's got the full-time slot role. It's one of the ones that does rely, because Baker's pure arm, there's no rushing upside. Well, that is the one that could triple stack and could end up getting there, more often than not, feeding multiple mouths. Now, I don't think that McMillan, Otton, and Evans and Godwin are all going to get fed, especially not every week. But you're kind of drafting McMillan with the idea that like something happens to Godwin, whether the rumblings of him getting traded, there's some of that talk going on. you're kind of drafting him for him being a full-time starter, whether it's injury, whether it's a rookie come on at the end of the season, whether Godwin again gets traded. I wouldn't rule out McMillan with a Baker stack just because the aerial type of quarterbacks, like aerial only quarterbacks, can sustain those three type of weapons. So I think you're discrediting what Baker the Baker. Here I am hyping up Baker Mayfield as this like monster, but I don't know. I like him. We did have some questions from Krana too, so I'm happy to pull those in. Unless you wanted to retort my my Baker talk here.
No, I was thinking a little bit about that. The Seahawks stack that Legal Hawk there in the 9 slot has going on. I just haven't seen Fant go that high. So, But let's get to Krana's question.
So if I get 2 elite receivers first 2 rounds followed by a QB1 and tight end 1, can easily get quality running back 1s in 5 and 6. I agree. And Connor is going round 7, 8, 9. So not even then. You're just kind of outlining a plan here, Krana, and that's exactly what we've been doing on the vast majority of these drafts is 2 elite receivers, 3 elite receivers as much as we can. Sometimes even 4 in a row because especially on, I think in redraft, it will be a bit different. You always see on Yahoo and ESPN, the running backs go earlier, but on these drafts, especially so as wide receiver thirsty as they are, I mean, you can get Najee Harris in round 8. You can get Zach Moss in round 9. You can get James Conner, as you just cited, at the 8, 9 turns. So absolutely in these formats where receivers are bumped up so high and running backs are so low, like I understand the idea too of like zigging where people are zagging and maybe the skeleton key is going running back early. No, not in these. There's just too many good running backs available in that 7 to 9 range that yes, like you're outlining exactly. And then you mentioned Wright, Brooks, like some of these rookies that could have that backloaded production. So I think you outlined exactly what we like to do in these. We're even more extreme with it. All right, it's our pick. So share this tab instead. I don't hate Baker, although it does nothing for us. Jonnu Smith, maybe a tight end. Khalil Herbert. I mean, Chuba's sitting there. Anything speak to you?
Nothing particular. I'm cool with Smith to get the Miami stuff and finish out our tight end room.
Yep. All righty. So we got 3 tight ends, which I think with Ingram, like it's a nice safe one, but he doesn't have huge spikes. Whereas K Dotton's safe too. So we're gonna probably get reliable like 8 to 12 points from these guys every week. And I do think we'll get some like John who gets schemed for like a 70-yard touchdown. So I don't mind that at all. So we're looking at like a 3-5-7-3 is what it's likely going to be. So we probably can't have Khalil Herbert. I don't think we can afford another running back unless we just stuck with Lawrence and Baker, but I don't think we can.
I'm not really looking to.
Me neither. So I think what screwed us up is like Will Levis went, and that's who we often would look to in this range.
I don't mind grabbing Fields if he's there either.
Yeah, I think this could be the range we go Fields.
That guy just double taps the both backup Niner running backs. That is, I don't think that's really smart. I think taking a stand either way. Like I can see the debate for both sides. Like, I mean, I remember like people talking about Tyrion Davis Price, like TDP, like he's the new backup we'll make our pick, but
being Fields or my boy DeMarcus?
I'm fine with Fields.
All right, yeah, I think we need that.
There.
Nah, I've seen him fall just a couple times, but yeah, this plays well into the Pacheco, Rome Wilson. If he's starting in those fantasy playoffs, I do think he brings a higher ceiling than either Lawrence or Baker. And our quarterback, that if we're going to get there, we might need that like late Justin Fields. So yeah, I'm with you there. And then we just whatever receiver, if there's one that makes sense with our team, great. We can go with that. I don't know that. I mean, maybe is it Bo Melton? do we take a late Packer?
I wonder what percentage of drafts he's going to end up being drafted in. He
had a few huge weeks down the stretch last year. Remember when he barely played, but like
I remember. When they were completely decimated, he was out there. But I mean, what is he on this depth chart? Like the 5th or 6th wide receiver, or the 5th, I think. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. But it's also the
it's
idea
tough.
of like, well, who does he have to overtake? Christian Watson, who's never out there. Dobbs, who had that huge playoff game, sure, but like I don't know, it's Romeo Dobbs. Like I'm not. Maybe Dobbs is the guy. I like Wicks a lot. I really do. I don't know. That's the hardest depth chart to overcome, though.
It
I
definitely
don't
is
know.
not.
So I mean, I think there's going to be better options for us. I hope there's better options. McMillan will probably be there if we want to round out our stack with McMillan.
Yeah.
Um,
I would honestly be more comfortable with the Baker triple stack than I would with Melton.
I think that's fair. I'm trying to think if there's even any other names like Kadarius Toney. No, I'm all good there. We could like Treylon Burks, probably not. Like I want to try to think like we don't really have any Titans run back at all for our Jags, which is fine, but I don't think that forcing in. I mean, Tyler Boyd might be there. Do we?
No, yeah, that's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. I mean, typically, yeah you want to go some of the more high upside guys in here, but I mean, like, it provides us some correlation, and I think that's a good call.
Yeah, he could be interesting there too.
And I think we need to grab a receiver.
I mean, we can't just go 6 receivers, right? Because there are
running backs. We definitely have to go receiver here.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think one point. Of course he does. And then goes my boy DeMarcus, who I had I was eyeing up. One guy I'll queue up to, a guy I've been taking in a lot of these drafts in my last round, is Jalen Tolbert, and I do want to start thinking about maybe some Ryan Flournoy, just because they talked a lot about like how maybe this is like the Tutu and Puka situation where like sure going in and then Tolbert just goes as we talk about him. But like Tolbert's the veteran and starter by name right now, but what if this rookie is the one that overtakes him, and then what if this rookie just ends up being nasty? There was very slim chance of it. This is probably not going to be another Puka, but I mean, what if it is? So yeah, I as long as he comes to us here, and who knows how this one was going to go. I think McMillan's probably the play here.
I think so too.
He's there. And if he's not there, then I really like McMillan as a player. Honestly, I as a Pats fan, I like Polk, and I'm happy we got him. But pre-draft, I would have said McMillan is even better.
I think McMillan or Malik Washington are the play here.
Yeah, and we have enough of the without Tua, we already have a lot of Dolphins here.
Yeah,
so
that's fair.
Yeah. All righty. Not horrible, I don't think.
It's definitely interesting. We went a little bit running back heavier in the early rounds than we typically do, but I mean, once again, it's not bad to mix things up.
No, yeah, let's kind of look at what we may have considered doing differently. And again, I would have definitely preferred Adams to Evans, but the way this team worked out, Baker becomes a key piece of this.
It ended up being all right.
So I wouldn't have changed any of the 3 picks other than considering Adams versus Evans, but I'm fine with it. Like that's
I'm mixing in Neighbors over Waddle these days. It's hard for me to. I don't really like Neighbors at the price. Like he's usually going around 26, 27, and I'm not a huge fan, but there does not seem to be budge in terms of the price. So I'm just gonna kind of give in because I don't want to not have Malik Neighbors on my teams. Like you have to have a talent of the quality, like a prospect of the quality of Malik Neighbors. You got to have on some teams. So I'm just kind of biting the bullet and grabbing them.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people argue, oh, well, Daniel Jones is always going to cap him, and they might not be wrong, but if Drew Lock ends up taking over, not that this is the ceiling igniter, Drew Lock, but like we saw, Darius Slayton having big days with Tyrod Taylor down the stretch last year. So I do like the argument I had. Everybody that watched me last year at all knows I was pretty in on Daniel Jones, and it was a lot because I like Brian Daboll, and I still do. I believe in the play caller. I believe he's going to know how to use a weapon like Malik Neighbors. That's why I also get excited about Tyron Tracy in the later rounds there. And whether it is Daniel Jones capping him and then Drew Lock takes over, or Daniel Jones just, again, 2 years ago, he was making Isaiah Hodgins the top 15 receiver and freaking, what was the dude's name? Richie James was a top 10 receiver for a 15 from week 15 to 17. So if those guys can be top 15 guys with Daniel Jones in the most important weeks, which was helping nobody because it was, again, Isaiah Hodgins and Richie James. But, like, if those guys can do it for the playoffs, such as you're telling me Malik Neighbors just as good of a prospect potentially as Marvin Harrison can't. So, yeah, I am not in the – yes, going ahead of, like, Nico Collins and Adams and Evans at times is rich. But I am not against Malik Neighbors by any means. And I don't know that we've drafted him together quite yet. So he's a name I'd like to click on sooner than later. I had him on a lot of the big board drafts before he landed with the Giants, but I don't see any reason to cool on him. So that was, I guess, something we could have considered. Waddle versus Neighbors. I'm trying to think Giants off the top of your head. They faced the Colts in week 17. Do you know who they had? Is it the Cardinals in week? No,
it's not. I'm trying. It's Atlanta. It's Atlanta.
So it's not a bad schedule either.
It's not. And it's in Atlanta, so it's indoors, which is a plus.
Yeah.
And I mean, at least how we expect things to be going, expecting Atlanta to be able to pretty easily dominate New York in that matchup, and high throw rate for Danny Dimes or whoever's that quarterback in that game, ideally, and kind of what we expect just based on these team expectations. So good playoff matchup for Neighbors. And like I said, his price really isn't budging either way. So I actually grabbed him at 30 in a draft. That's where I'm kind of grabbing him, is when he falls to that 28 to 30 range. Cause like I said, just like I know that I need to have Neighbors on rosters. It's just like, it's hard for me to click him over names like DJ Moore and Stephon Diggs.
Sure. And I would agree with all that completely. I think if I was doing it over, I might have taken him here at 29 because I just already have a decent amount of Waddle, but I love Waddle round 3. Like, I think he's a great round 3 click. So I'm not mad about that. We look at Pacheco, and that was another one where, like, I love Tank Dell. So not going Dell there was pretty tough. And you got to wonder a little bit, like, if we had gone Dell, would Pacheco have made it back to us? I don't think so. And there was also the Amari Cooper temptation because to correlate with Waddle. And I do have Cooper in the same tier as Flowers and Higgins, but I do have Dell a tier above those guys. But I also have talked a lot about how I love Isaiah Pacheco with no McKinnon and an offense that I think is going to be significantly better this year. So more touchdown opportunities. I mean, the guy averaged nearly 20 points a game when McKinnon was not playing last year. And CEH, I'm not worried about CEH suddenly getting involved. So I really do love Pacheco. Would you have done anything different instead of Pacheco here? Like, is there anyone else you were considering?
I know. I mean, like, obviously, like, I like in certain, like, in some drafts, I grabbed some of these guys ahead of Pacheco, but I don't think like it's a bad pick by any means. The only thing, looking 2 rounds down, I think we could have gone Rome ahead of Kenneth Walker, but I mean, like, that was just we didn't know that we were going to be setting up a Seattle stuff later in the draft, and we could have gone with Rome and then done more Seattle stuff later with that Lockett pick, and then maybe grabbing Geno and then maybe Fant, like, just in terms of the week 17 stuff. So that's the only thing that really comes to mind, because that's like the last significant weapon other than Kmet in the 130s involved in Chicago.
Yeah,
that's like,
but you look here too. Geno and Fant went like 20 picks above their ADPs. I don't think we're ever getting those guys.
Someone went ballistic with their Seattle stacks there. So does that guy have Chicago? He must, right?
Let's see.
Yeah, Keenan. He's got Keenan.
DeAndre Swift. Yeah, Keenan, Swift.
Keenan, yeah.
Nice Josh Allen value here, by the way. 40.
Yeah. Don't see him in the 40s very often.
No, you're seeing him slip to
or Hurts, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, both these guys fall into where they're starting to. Oh man, yeah, that's a nice value. But back to grading our team. So yeah, we also talked about Kirk versus McLaurin. I think you screamed out McLaurin in the last second. We didn't get it in. Okay. And I do prefer McLaurin to Kirk, but I think it worked out for us okay. That like it worked out into a nice stack for us with Lawrence, Evan Ingram, and Kirk. So I think all the picks that like I would have wanted to like rewind and go Adams instead or Kirk. Of course, our draft would have flowed differently had we. But I also am like I don't know how I can't really picture this team without the stacks that we ended up creating. I mean,
Yeah.
it probably would have been like Terry here and then maybe Jaden Daniels at 101 instead, and then that would have shifted it up. But who knows what we would have done with like Ingram instead now. I don't have you have a lot of Jag stacks, so you probably aren't overly excited to have yet another one. But I don't have money, so I am kind of excited myself to get some action on that game. They have a nice schedule with the Raiders and Titans, who we didn't correlate with, but
no.
So Walker, you mentioned Rome there too. Maybe he does fit the bill of what we're talking about with these, the back end production, like the back weighted production. I think Rome is the picture of that. I don't know how effective early on he'll be with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. And then you're relying on a rookie quarterback to sustain 3 of these mouths. I don't know about that, but Keenan Allen almost every year seems to get dinged up down the stretch, lose steam, right in time for Rome to just go bananas. Any given class, like he would have been the number one guy. It's just a matter of the fact that he was competing with Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors this year to be the number one guy. So he's somebody I was taking 48, 49 before he got drafted to the Bears, and I haven't really drafted since. But the more we talked about that back-weighted production, the more I'm like, yeah, especially if I had some early Seahawks. Like, I mean, had he made his way to us here at 77, it would have been a no-brainer. And I've seen him start to fall that far too. But I might be getting a little more into Rome these days. Even on like Amon-Ra, St. Brown, the week 16 correlation with the Lions. I gotta get a little more Rome. I think that would have been an interesting click here.
Like you said, I mean, at the end of the day, changing one pick probably definitely changes how the entire draft flows.
You're not drafting well if you don't, right?
Yeah. I'm fine with how our draft ended up. We've got the Tampa Bay stack with the Carolina bring back and Jonathan Brooks. We've got our Jacksonville stack, and then we've got some game stacks in Cleveland and Miami. So, well, I think we set ourselves up okay in terms of week 17 correlation, and I think we've got quality talent across the board. So just holistically, I don't like there's nothing like obviously, yeah, like some picks could have gone one way or another, but in terms of how the draft shaped up, I think it's okay. And like, yeah, we've honestly got like game stacks across the board. I didn't even like realize Marshawn Lloyd and Jefferson. Yeah. So yeah, in terms of week 17 correlation, I think we're fine.
Yeah, we've got a lot of skinny stacks, nothing like too crazy loaded up. I think that's one thing I would have preferred to see a Green Bay receiver on here, and in hindsight, it probably would have been Dobbs here. But like I said, I don't buy that Dobbs. I was really hoping Wicks would have fallen here. We got Lloyd, so we got some of our Green Bay action there. But like, I've had a few where I've gotten Wicks here and then Lloyd on the run back on the next pick. But I like I really do think the Chiefs Steelers one sneaky underrated, just because I think the Chiefs defense took some decent hits with no Snead now. They have a good D front now, but like getting Wilson and Fields, and we're kind of banking on Fields opening that game up and being the starter by then. That intrigues me for week 17. And yeah, I mean, Baker's the type of guy that having a few of his pieces in McMillan, Cade Otton, and I mean, Cade Otton's the one that I'm also like, yeah, I don't know who I would have gone instead. Maybe Javon Baker. I do like, but he just one thing that I have been doing again that bottom top to top drafting. Zach Moss, also love Gus Edwards, and I love late Patriots guys like Polk and Baker. So I do find myself, it doesn't seem sexy by any means, a Chargers Pats week 17 build, but just with the guys I often have, it works out. It's like a later stack that you can build. You don't have to, it's not going to require your early guys to be correlated. So, but Baker would have done nothing for us in terms of correlation. So, it worked out. I don't know. It's a weird one. Yeah. Not when I sit here saying I love it, but like it fits the roster construction and correlation pretty well.
Like we've said throughout the show, we have no clue what's going to be like the attackable matchup when week 17 rolls around. So we've got the correlation. We've got players that we think are talented. Like it might not be the one that you think is the best week 17 matchup right now, but when week 17 rolls around, who knows what we're going to be looking at. So just like get your correlation, get guys you think are good. And I think we've checked both of those boxes.
when Nick Chubb rolls for 700 yards in the final 3 weeks of the season, we'll come back live and say that was the pick.
I'll have you to thank for that one.
I know you weren't a fan of that one, but yeah, again, now we got Miami, Cleveland. We took our stabs. We took our correlated.
It ended up working out.
It could work out big. We'll see. Alrighty. Well, that wraps up that. I mean, I'm happy to answer a couple. We got a few more questions here.
Just
that I'm
plow through the mailbag and get out of here.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Sounds
Chrono,
good.
as always. I feel like you've asked this every single week. You cannot, as much as I love all your questions, you can't ask the 3 wide receivers in Chicago again because am I crazy, Mo, or is Chrono asked this every single week?
Personally, I don't recall a specific question about the Chicago receivers, but then again, I mean, like, I may just be forgetting. So
maybe maybe somebody else. But I feel like Chrono, I know he's from Chicago. And you know what? Maybe it's just a random Chicago question. That's fine. Maybe I'm overthinking it because I know you've definitely asked about Swift before. I swear you've asked this one, but maybe not, Chrono. I'm happy to. I'm just also messing with you. I love your questions, so we're just playing around with you either way. So I've seen this concern brought up that Odunze will be just like JSN because Waldron's the coordinator, and it didn't work out for JSN with Waldron, so he's worried about Rome. I don't buy that for a few reasons. One, Caleb Williams, again, that is a worry. It's a rookie quarterback. But if all the hype is real, this guy's supposed to be the best prospect since Andrew Luck. I don't know that I buy it, but that's different than Geno Smith randomly resurging. 2, Rome and JSN, and this is probably the bigger point, are 2 completely different wide receivers. Like they are not, it's apples and oranges. You're talking about insane, big body, can win the jump balls, do it all. And I really liked JSN coming out. I don't know that maybe I had him a little overrated, but that's not his game. Like Rome is not going to be the slot. And JSN was just using that slot, like average. I think it was like an average of like 6.5 average depth of target. It was pathetic. And JSN can get deep. He was misused by Waldron. Does that concern me a little bit? Sure. But this is an absolutely different weapon that's going to be playing a different role in this offense. And you think about the 3 receiver sets, they did run them at a decent clip, and JSN was the one that was taken off the field. I don't think Rome, who can block for sure, that big body, that's where they'll probably take Keenan Allen off the field. So I do not see this as a similar situation. I can get why Waldron concerns you, and I know JSN had that like kind of call out in a press conference about it, and there's a fair, legitimate, a little bit fairness to that concern. Is Waldron any good? But at least in terms of these are 2 completely different players. Like I'm not, if I'm going to be worried about Rome, it's not that I think Waldron's going to misuse him like he misused JSN, because it's just completely different types of weapons. What do you think, Mo?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say too. JSN was relegated to this like low A-dot screen passes at the line of scrimmage from the slot type of deal. And if Shane Waldron tries to use Rome Odunze in that capacity, he should be fired. That is not how you are supposed to use a guy with that draft capital and that just like player archetype. If anyone's bumping into the slot, and like I don't think if anyone, I think the player that will be bumped into the slot is Keenan Allen. I mean, he's been successful out of the slot in San Diego or Los Angeles now, San Diego and Los Angeles. So, and he's just like kind of, you see the guys who have been successful outside wide receivers as they get a little older, just like moving into the slot just so they have easier matchups and they're still good route runners and can win out of the slot. So I think Keenan Allen moves out of the slot. But yeah, like I said, obviously like the concern is there. There's a path where Rome is just like hampered because of the fact that there's 2 other great weapons and he just doesn't get there. Obviously it happens, but it's not going to happen because he's in a slot role getting these low A-dot targets. Because like I said, Shane Waldron should not be an NFL coach if that's how he ends up getting used. So yeah, that's not the path for Odunze to fail.
No, I agree with that completely. And Bargustus, while I'm answering, I love your questions. Can't wait to some great comments in here too. I'd love, as I'm answering Crona's next question, if you're still here with our Bargustus, I'd love to know what is A.T. Perry's path, because I personally, the only path he had last year was Jameis Winston making throws in like triple coverage, and he caught 1 touchdown. It was a nice catch by the dude, so maybe he does have some untapped ability. I'm not sure Carr is going to be the one to tap into that. There's not a lot of receivers on the roster, so maybe that's what you're thinking. I'd love your take because I don't even hate A.T. Perry as a player. I personally have not taken him once, so I would love to know more about what you're thinking there for A.T. Perry's path.
Give me Bub Means ahead of A.T. Perry. We made fun of Bub Means, and I still like him ahead of A.T. Perry.
I'm not again convinced Bub Means is a human being. Well, I'll believe that when I actually see it. Thoughts on stacking 2 tight ends? Like if I got Laporta, taking Kincaid helps. I don't know what you mean by stacking here in terms of Laporta and Kincaid. I guess I think what you're kind of getting at, Cron, is like a bully tight end build is often what it's referred to here in terms of like getting 2 really good tight ends early. In best ball, I really do like it. It redrafted, it's a little trickier because like, are you really going to start one in your flex? And when you put that capital in, you're kind of saying yes. And there were some last year I had Kincaid and Laporta, funny enough, on this question. And by the end of the season, I was starting both of those guys with one of them in my flex as they started to really realize their ceilings. So yes, there is that path, but I also took those guys in my redraft league, like round 11 and 12, 15, whatever they were going. It wasn't round 5 and 6, or Laporta's case 3 and 5 here. So I do like, though, in best ball, I like this philosophy. We've talked about it a couple times, Mo, in terms of like we really like doing this with Kittle when he falls in like the middle of round 6 to. I got Kittle at 81 in a draft the other day. I couldn't believe it. I had Kelsey already, and I was like, I'm not gonna not take Kittle at 81. Insane. So I absolutely am into it. A lot of people are talking more and more about these builds. The thing is, though, is that as tight end, the more I've listened to some of these guys that like continue to be in the finals, and again, Corain winning the whole thing, a lot of times they keep referencing the fact that like tight end is the least important. Many times that it's the one position that like if you get 11 to 15, you can still make it up. But then at the same time, like if you get those 30-point tight ends, like that is also the thing I could see putting you over the edge. I am into these 2 tight end, like especially Laporta Kittle works out because you're game stacking that game as well. If the price is right on them both, I totally can see it. But I am a little averse to going like round 4, Trey McBride, round 5, Kincaid. Like I just think the opportunity cost at receiver is a little too great. The only time I'm really doing this is with Kittle in round 6 when the receivers have dropped off, like Ridley's gone to a point where I just don't love the receivers anymore. Then maybe I do it. But I don't know. I haven't found myself very often going like round 4, 5. I don't know, but I know it's a little long-winded, but what do you think?
It's certainly viable in best ball, and especially like I'm not opposed to doing it, and I mean, like I enjoy it at times. Just like I think it can help with your roster construction, just in terms of. But I really just only do it when one of them slips. That's the only time I do it. And in redraft, no, don't do this. Like you don't like unless you're like I ran a team with 2 tight ends, but it was an insanely deep league, and we ran 2 flexes. So that was where it made sense. So yeah, don't be doing this in redraft, but in best ball, it's certainly viable when one of the guys slips, and then you're just done with tight end. So
yeah, I would still though caution. Yes, it's viable in best ball. It's certainly in terms of differentiation because not a lot of teams are going to do that. I just think the opportunity cost at receiver, like there really is like by mid round 6 at the latest. And to me, it's like kind of Calvin Ridley, Jordan Addison tier. I guess you could have like Hopkins and Godwin, like the next tier that are still acceptable 4s. But man, like yeah.
Only do it when one of them slips. And if you're, I mean, I don't want to say it's good to plan this out, but like if it's going to be a true 0 RB roster, like you're not going to be sacrificing a ton at receiver. And if you're just like going to fully punt running back or maybe even quarterback, but probably just like if it's going to be a 0 RB roster, like that's really when you can do it. But yeah, only when it slips, and only if you're like going to fully punt running back is where the situations where you should be doing that.
I'm thinking of a build right now, like where I could actually see it viable. Let's say you go Garrett Wilson and then you go Marv Harrison or whoever on the next way back. And then Laporta does make it to the back end of round 3 where he probably should be going anyways. Okay, so now, or let's say you went Ayuk, to whatever. Garrett Wilson, Ayuk, that's your start. And then you go Sam Laporta. So now you got the correlation with Ayuk. And then, a couple picks later, maybe Trey McBride. I've seen him fall to like late round 5. Maybe that's the guy there. Yeah, I still am like, because I was thinking like, yeah, then you could go Kincaid to correlate with Garrett Wilson, but it just feels like a whole lot of forcing and probably reaching at some point rather than, like you said, Mo, I think you summarized it well. If it falls to you and it looks good and you're set on your receivers in best ball already, you have 3 you love, ideally 4. I could see 3 receivers and then like McBride, Kincaid being intriguing, but I'd have a hard time pulling this off if I didn't have at least 3 receivers I loved and ideally 4. That's why Kittle has kind of been the more often bully tight end build. Because I think he brings just as much upside as the other guys. He just goes in middle round 6-7, so you can do a lot better. Imagine, I love this comment from Bar Gustus. Imagine double tapping San Fran backups and then Cody Schrader ends up as the backup. I love that because I also do really like Cody Schrader. A lot of the reports on him, great zone runner, like all the stuff that Shanahan would look for. I was listening to I think it's Matt Miller, one of my favorite scouts that was on, and just talking about like he really scouts the running back position well. He loved Cody Schrader. He loved a bunch of these undrafted guys, and I'm into Schrader too. I thought he should have been drafted. I mean, he's better pure as a running back than Guerrero in my opinion in terms of like the vision, the feel for the position. Guerrero does have that massive just like ceiling as this crazy size speed freak with Kyle Shanahan, a GOAT schemer. But yeah, I don't ever get the value of, I mean, handcuffing in general is kind of a bad strategy in best ball. It can work out okay. I was going to say when we took Chubb, like if our running backs weren't already stacked, like I don't mind going Chubb and then like last round Foreman because you kind of do create this bridge of this very valuable run scheme. Maybe you got Foreman killing it for 5 weeks, then it gets you to Chubb, who no one else really has in the finals, and he goes nuts. But I don't love typically handcuffing anyways. It seems to cap your ceiling. And then when you handcuff 2 backups, it's just like doubly worse. So, and then this happens. Yeah. Bargustus is like, yeah, it's not a non-zero chance that neither of those guys end up being the primary backup. I'd be surprised if it's Cody Schrader, but man, like if it happened, it could happen. And that would just be one of the worst 1-2 punches I've ever seen. What's your thoughts on just like handcuffing though? Like I know you could certainly address the San Fran weird situation we saw, but also like, do you like handcuffing in these drafts? Is there situations you do it?
I made my thoughts pretty clear when the pick happened. I thought it was very dumb to double tap back to back both guys. So the double handcuff is, I think, objectively dumb. I don't think anyone is going to argue with that. I mean, maybe that guy is going to maybe argue that it's not dumb, but I don't like to handcuff, but when it's one of these like elite offenses that if the backup steps in, they're going to be a weekly top 24 running back, like sure I can get behind it, but other than that, like I just don't see it. There's only a couple of spots where I'm doing it, like even the backups like Breece Hall, like, and also we just don't really know who it's going to be. They drafted they drafted Braylon Allen. They've got Abanikanda. They drafted, who else did they draft? Isaiah Davis. Yeah. So, but like drafting CEH, like I talked about liking, like Tyler Algier, and not necessarily even on the teams where I have the starter, but so I like drafting the backup running backs, but yeah, you can get away with it on the teams where you have the starter, but mostly on just teams where they're naked, not necessarily naked, but just like you don't already have the starter. It's not a pure handcuff, and yeah, the double tap of the backup is nonsense. You just burned at least 1 draft pick.
Yeah, I'm actually fully there. Exactly what you said. Like it's so much higher potential EV to have the handcuffs. I love drafting handcuffs, just not of my guys. If you have Tyler Algier and Bijan goes down, but you didn't have Bijan, well, you still have whoever your first round pick is, and now the starting running back of the Falcons. It's beautiful. That's when we talked about the backloading the upside, the back-weighted upside. Like that's why you take handcuffs of other people. I think handcuffs are great picks. Blake Corum, if you don't have Kyron and Kyron goes down, is now a top 5 running back, and you didn't have to have that round 2 pick in Kyron. So I am all for drafting the handcuffs. I just very, very rarely. I think like Chubb's an example because Chubb's so cheap as a potential starter. And I think Foreman as a starter could like be Chubb light and he's a last round pick. So there's times I will draft a whole backfield when it's cheap like that. But like if I'm drafting a first round running back, I'm probably not winning if that guy gets hurt. I guess if you handcuff it, maybe you give yourself a little insurance. But it's just if CMC's gone, that dude's probably not winning. And I don't think having two potential handcuffs is going to save him by any means. So yeah, I don't really like drafting the handcuff of my starters in best ball. In redraft, it's a little different when you just need the safe insurance policies. We're talking much different. But in best ball, when you're trying to win, like we talked about this whole time, 1,500,000, having it's definitely lowering your ceiling to draft your own handcuffs for sure. Looks like we got the stamp of approval from Bargustus. Love to hear it. I did not know this. That I knew Evan Ingram had I believe it was like the second or third most receptions in the league last year. I did not know it was the second most all-time receptions by a tight end last year, though.
I didn't know that either. I know he had, probably like the sneakiest 100 reception season of all time. But I didn't know that was the second most all time by a tight end. That's new info.
I think he was third in targets last year, like of all of receivers and tight ends and everybody. But I did not know all time. That's an interesting one. And like, it's crazy because like then people might point that be like, yeah, and then he still was only like the tight end 6 or 7. And I get that. Like his touchdown luck was some of the worst I've ever seen. Like he didn't score till I think like week 11. And is that an Ingram problem? Maybe, but like we've seen him score 7 to 8. I think his rookie year he had like 10 touchdowns. It was like, damn, this guy is like right from the jump, like a beast. So let's say he probably doesn't set the second, most reception record for tight ends all time again, but let's say that gets cut in half by 10 and he scores 4 to 5 more touchdowns like we've seen him do in the past. Then he's even better than he was last year. And God forbid he does catch 100 balls again and then scores 8 touchdowns to go with, the yardage. Then it's crazy. Like the fact that, Ridley's gone now and he already was seeing that much volume. Like, yeah, they added Brian Thomas, who I do like a lot. Sure, Gabe Davis, that doesn't do much for me. But to me, like Ridley's a bigger mouth than probably either of those guys, at least rookie year Thomas for right now. So I've been trying to get a lot more Evan Ingram. Him and Ferguson, like we've talked, like you said a bunch. I totally agree with you in that sense. Like I want at least one of those guys, and I feel okay if I get 1 to 2 more later tight ends after that. But I really don't like leaving those rounds. And I think by then, round 7, the receivers, we had Hopkins in play there, but our tight end would have been hideous had we done that. And we didn't end up getting the exact path, so Bargustus must be gone at this point. So we don't know what the path is yet for A.T. Perry. I can't help you find out. Yeah. We'll be searching for a while, but in week 17, when A.T. Perry has 3 touchdowns, Bargustus can come and let us know and say, there's the path right there. Good stuff. All righty. Well, as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. All our content, as we've alluded to throughout the show, is at rotostreetjournal.com. My man Mo _FFB is a phenomenal follow on Twitter. Started to pump out some great best ball stuff. I know you got, as you talked about, your schedule piece coming out. Is it all ready for me to edit at this point? Ready to get in the hopper? Or
I'm going to finish up after this, actually. So it'll be ready by the end of the evening.
Sweet. So we'll be on the lookout for that in the morning. My best ball rankings, I got to get another update. And it's been a couple of weeks since I touched those up, but they've been updated well since the draft. And I just want to get a couple more thoughts into those. So check out all our content there at roaststreetjournal.com. Again, you can find me at rotostreetwolf, at Mo _FFB. Jaws, you missed it, but you can catch the replay. And we'll be live again, as we always are, at 4 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. We talked about potentially tossing another draft this week. So follow us on Twitter. We'll be posting out. We'll try to get maybe one more of these in because clearly we love it and it's the best. So thanks again for being here, guys. In a world full of fantasy sheep, be the wolf. Later.